Cheers, Laserheads. Cloudfather here. We're just going to do some general tinkering today. We've got some outlines that we've cut. Um, these are going to be used as interior decorations in the RV that we'll be working on. So we're going to do a little bit of playing around, see what new interesting things we can do. So we're starting with $1.25 a sheet, what looks to be basswood. It's about 2 millimeters thick. This is what I usually use to test to see what an image is going to look like, or an outline, so I can evaluate what I want to do when I put it on a different material. So here's our Native American art. And we're going to start setting this up to go ahead and burn it. We have gone in and set the framing up for this. So the board itself is 300 by 300, but it has 2 little holes in the top. We're putting a string through to hold the board. So we're reducing the height of the image to 275. Now we're going to go ahead and do a burn at let's go with 10,000, and we're going to set the power up in 35 watt mode to 40 just for a quick first pass. Now if we open up the cut settings editor, we're going to go with overscan at 3.5%. We're going to go 96 dpi for the first pass, and we're going to use sketch mode. And we're going to use a positive image. So one of the things we're looking at here is, of course, this type of wood always is very bowed, so it's not flat at all. So this first pass is to kind of get a handle on how badly out of focus on the edges or it's going to be from the problems with the warping of the wood. This wood's kind of interesting because it doesn't burn the way you would expect it to. Notice how fat the laser dot looks. That's a characteristic of the wood. If I put a piece of ceramic tile under here, it'll be a perfect pinpoint. So different materials do have a different effect in terms of what you observe. So we've been observing the burn on here. We're going to stop this job and increase the power to probably 60% at 10,000, because we're just not getting enough burning on the wood. So we're now rerunning the job. You'll notice immediately that at 10,000, 60 and 35 watt mode, we're now starting to get a clearly visible light burn, which is what we're after. We're in sketch mode. When sketch mode is done, we're going to go back in grayscale mode, because this is an image, and we're going to run 2 passes. We're going to run one at probably 6,000 and 0 to 40%, and then we'll run another at 24,000 at 85%, and that will basically clean both of the first 2 layers. And that also helps us get additional depth in the image, even though this is not a 3D image, it's just a grayscale image. So this is a pretty nice 96 dpi. We're getting a nice clear sketch of the image. If we look at the image here, the image is pretty complex. It's got a lot of different grayscale in it. And so this is a good test to see what kind of balance we can attain in the final image on this very expensive wood using 3 layer passes. Now as we're lasing here, you notice on the left hand side we have the image going out of focus. On the right hand side we have the image also going out of focus, but in the middle we have pretty well focused, and that's an effect of the warp of the wood. This particular piece is not only warped in one direction, it's warped in 3 different directions. It's basically twisted. So we're seeing that image not fully burn correctly because of the lack of flatness in the board. Now, strategies you can use, and it will work most of the time, is I take 12 gauge steel plate and then I actually sprinkle a little bit of water using a spray bottle on them, and then I put every other board in between the layers of this heavy steel, and then I'll let it sit for a month. This stuff right here basically came fresh out of the package, and that's one of the other things we wanted to test, is to see what kind of shape the materials would be if you just unwrapped them and used them. Okay, so this was a first sketch patch, and as we notice, there's really widely varying focus on this. So that's a characteristic of the wood not being level, and of course if you're on a honeycomb, it's impossible to get a level surface. You're always off by 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters, particularly if you're doing full bed 855 by 800 work. You're definitely going to have all kinds of curvature and so forth caused by the bed. It can't be level ever because of the way they're built. And in fact, I have not yet seen a honeycomb that's a one-piece honeycomb. What's in here now is an IKEA or 2-piece honeycomb, and there's enough difference between the 2 sides that you don't want to do work in the center. So we're going to go, now that we've done sketch at 96 DPI, we're going to now next do grayscale, and we're going to run it at 0 to 40 in terms of power. And I think we'll run it at about 6,000 the first pass to kind of get a handle. This particular wood is unpredictable in terms of how the grayscale is going to work. So you kind of have to play with it a little bit, and then you gradually tune it down. And the goal is to start low power, a little higher speed, to start seeing the image, and then you just slow down a little, add a little more power a bit at a time until you get the image looking the way you want it to. But again, we have a combination of warp wood and a combination of a bed that's honeycomb, which is never flat. And lasers, focus-wise, 1/100th of a millimeter is enough to defocus the laser. Now, the focusing that we're using right now is the default Z, which is 15 in an A or an X series atom stack laser. So we're setting up for grayscale. We're going to go with 6,000, 0 to 40, normal image, 3.5 on the overscan. We're going to go to 171 DPI. The final pass we'll do at 300. We've got the dot width correction set to 020, and of course in grayscale mode with a single pass. So we're now running in 6040 mode, 171 DPI. We picked a middle DPI because we're slowly adding layers, and we notice immediately that it is now getting a much more even pass. We also changed the focus. What we did is we went to the lowest portion of the board, the one that's out of focus and closest to the center, and then we did an autofocus from there, and that leaves it at a focus length of 15. So the hope now is by doing that we'll be able to get a more even burn across the entire surface. Now, one thing to think about when you're doing larger grayscale images is they take a lot of time. Even at 171 DPI, this 250 or 275 by 300 image is going to take 1.5 or more hours, even at 171 dpi. If I do it at 300, it's about a 4-hour job. So just be thinking about that when you're planning to do these. And it's not unusual at all, if you really want a clean, good-looking image, to do as many as 4 passes on this type of material. We're getting ready to play with some tiles here, and we've got a mix of really expensive paint and really cheap paint, and then something kind of unusual. This is called inverted marking paint from Rust-Oleum. It's normally used for doing fields. So we got a whole bunch of 150 mil square tiles here, fresh out of the box. You notice, you probably can't see it, but there's lots of defects in the surface of these tiles. And one of the things that I'm not going to do again is buy tile in bulk, because they have all kinds of shipping damage and it makes for crappy art. The best way to buy this stuff is go to your hardware store and select a tile at a time, and that way you'll get pretty clean tile. And what you're looking for is any defects in the surface. It should be shiny and smooth. So the typical paints we have is Rust-Oleum. We have a couple of off brands. We have a set of colors. So we're going to do some multi-layered stuff. We put the darkest colors on first and the lightest colors on the top, and then we do the reverse order on the next set. Then we do just a couple of layers, and then we also are going to use the marking paint to do a tile because it has lots of titanium dioxide. And what's interesting is it actually works better than the stuff we normally use for Norton method, which is titanium dioxide and isopropyl alcohol. And then what we're going to do is do a real quick little spray of the Rust-Oleum metallic finish. It's kind of a goldish color, and it adds some kind of neat patterning to the stuff. And we're not going to do full layers. We're just going to kind of do a little spot so we get a mix of color on our smorgasbord. Because remember, when you start putting paint on tile, you're basically going through and making about 1/100 of a mil thick layers of paint, and depending on the power of the laser setting and the speed, it'll uncover various different layers till you actually get down to the white. So that's basically a subtractive approach to doing art with the tiles. So this particular tile has been done with the marker paint. As you can see, the rest of them, you see a little sheen on them. That's the metallic. And then we just have very light coats of various different colors, which will burn off layer by layer. So we'll get differing effects from that. So we'll use relatively low power with this. These need to dry for about an hour to an hour and a half. Notice over here you can see those defects in the tile. And unfortunately you can't sand them out. So best thing to do is make art out of them. So now we can actually see how layering works. The first thing we did was a sketch, which is the outlines. And now we're at a 6000 0-40 grayscale. And you notice we're starting to get nice clean images, but we're not getting a bunch of burn smears. And that's the reason why we do it in layers, in typically 3 or more passes, so that we use a laser to actually clean off the debris. This has got about another hour to run, so we'll check back in an hour. Okay, so this is our 6000 0-40 pass. We're now going to increase the speed and see if we can increase the depth. And we still have a lot, especially over here and up here, of focus issues because of the uneven surface of the wood. So now we're going to run it at 10,000 at about 80% in 35 watt mode, and we're going to do 300 dpi. That's going to take probably 2 to 3 hours. Well, it doesn't look too bad. We basically got a pretty decent image. We have a little lightness up here, but it's also light in the photograph. We have a little bit of overburn, but a little bit of light sanding. Even just rinsing it off in warm water should take care of that. But generally not too bad. Definitely want to try it on a nice piece of wood as opposed to this test wood, but really a decent image. Okay, we've grabbed one of the tiles which we prepared earlier. You can see it here loaded. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that same image, we've reduced it down to 150 square, and we're going to run it with the same settings we did on the wood. Now this particular piece of tile is covered with the white chalk paint for marking lines on soccer fields. We can see from our startup that already the tile is actually quite similar to this $1.25 wood. This is 39-cent tile available from Lowe's Hardware. You can see that our banner stripe is already just about the right level of darkness. In about 35 minutes we'll see what it looks like. Here we are with 6070, or actually 9070, on white tile that has white chalk paint. This is a single grayscale pass, and not real happy with that paint. It doesn't really give me enough scale difference. So we're going to try one of the other tiles that's the same size with this same pattern, and we're going to use one with a yellow base layer, and then we'll do a blue base layer and a green base layer and see what we get. Okay, well, we've taken our Raven here and put it on a few different types of media. We actually got fairly good work done on the really expensive basswood. There is definitely differences in height in the wood, so that has changed the focus. You get a mix of light and dark. Next thing we tried was white tile with chalk paint. The chalk paint peels off, and so if I washed this image, it would lose everything, and that was at 70% power. So that, at least in this particular instance, is not useful. Now, chalk paint can be very useful on glass, but not on ceramics. This first one here was our yellow background on white, and we did get some fairly good definition. This was done with 9060. Then the next one is the one with the blue background, and this was done at 7575, and you can tell that the honeycomb isn't level, because otherwise it would be a much more even image. And then the final one we did is this one. This was on the dark green or forest green background. And this one actually turned out pretty nice. We did this one at 7500. These are all at 300 DPI and single pass. So we got a nice natural look to the images, which is what we were shooting for. And so these would be typical trivets for dishes and things. If you are going to use them for a trivet, you want to basically take these and coat them with, in this case, most of it was Rust-Oleum, so you want to use Rust-Oleum clear. If you use Krylon on Rust-Oleum, you'll get all kinds of wrinkles. So that's it for the day. Professor Clodfather out.